Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to mediation, as the President of India Draupadi Murmu and the Chief Justice of India Sanjeev Khanna batted for the adoption of mediation for conflict resolution and to lower the burden on the courts in India. The second article is related to the reservation in private sector, as there is a demand for this after the demand for caste census was acceded to by the central government. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the simplified which will help you in your prelims and mains preparation. Now, the first article is related to mediation. The context behind it is that the President and the Chief Justice of India have encouraged the adoption of mediation as an alternate dispute redressal mechanism. This will bring down the burden upon the judiciary in India. So we will discuss the need for mediation, the Mediation Act 2023, the concerns with the Mediation Act, the challenges associated with mediation in India. This is important in GS2 under the topic dispute redressal mechanisms. Now, mediation is one of the forms of alternate dispute redressal mechanisms. The alternate dispute redressal mechanisms can be arbitration, mediation, conciliation, negotiation. These mechanisms are not new in India. They have been practiced ever since the Vedic times also. For example, the arbitration and the mediation mechanisms, they find a mention in the Upanishads also. In the Bandarnayake Upanishad, there is a mention of the arbitral bodies. The arbitral bodies like Puga or the Ganas, the Srenis were merchant guilds, and the Kulas, etc. These were private arbitral bodies. Private in the nature that they were not established by the royalty, they were not established by the kings, rather they were functioning like the private dispute resolution mechanisms. Now, when we discuss the alternate dispute redressal mechanisms in India, they can be arbitration, mediation, conciliation and negotiation. In arbitration, there is a neutral third party known as the arbitrator. The arbitrator listens to the arguments of both the parties and announces an arbitration award. This arbitration award is like a decree which is enforceable in nature. Likewise, in conciliation and mediation also, there is a neutral third party. In conciliation, there is a conciliator. In mediation, there is a mediator. But in the conciliation, the award is not announced. Rather, the conciliator is bringing the two parties to the negotiating table. He even proposes the settlement mechanism, the terms of the settlements, and there is a conciliatory approach which is taken up to resolve the dispute between the parties. Likewise, in mediation also, the mediator brings the two parties to the negotiating table, but the role of mediator is more passive as compared to the conciliator. The conciliator plays a more active role, whereas the mediator's role is just to ensure that he is providing a conducive environment, that he is ensuring that the two parties, they are sitting at the table and they are discussing their dispute, they are putting forward their concerns, and it can be resolved amicably. Therefore, mediation as an alternate dispute redressal mechanism, this proposes the settlement of the disputes voluntarily. It is not the result of the mediation. The mediation agreement is not forced upon the parties. The both parties agree regarding the agreement of mediation voluntarily, and the disputes are settled, and the independent third person, that is the mediator, is ensuring a conducive environment for the settlement of the dispute. Therefore, there are no strict or binding rules of procedure also which have to be followed in the mediation, and it therefore reduces the case burden upon the courts. Now, when we look at the mediation setup in India, like we discussed, it was practiced in the ancient times also. Currently, if we see, the mediation can be court-referred mediation also. For example, the court can refer the parties for the settlement of the dispute through mediation. For example, the Delhi High Court refers the mediation settlements through the court annexed Delhi High Court annexed mediation center. Likewise, the mediation can be mandated through a contract agreement also. For example, if two parties enter into a contract and within the contract there is a term that if any one party breaches the terms of the contract, then before approaching the litigation mechanisms, both the parties have to submit themselves to a mediation. This can be included in the contract clauses itself. Likewise, there are specific statutes which also mandate going for the mediation. They encourage the adoption of mediation mechanisms. For example, Consumer Protection Act, Commercial Courts Act, etc. And there are private ADR centers also, or the court annexed mediation centers. Now, how does mediation work? Both the parties, they are brought to the table through the independent third party, that is the mediator. Their concerns are listened to by the mediator. The mediator conducts private sessions with both the parties. That is, he listens to both the parties separately and he tells about the concerns of the other party to the relevant party, and then joint negotiations also take place. Thus, the agreement is arrived upon voluntarily and the facilitation is done by the mediator. Now, why do we need mediation? We need mediation because there is a huge pendency of cases in India. In Supreme Court alone, as of recent data, there are more than 81,000 cases which are pending in the Supreme Court. Likewise, there are several tiers of appeals. Appeals are filed after the decision is given by the lower court. The appeal is filed first to the Sessions Court, then to the High Court, then to the Supreme Court. And what does it lead to? It leads to the delays, time is lost in the final settlement, and it leads to the increase in cost also. Whereas mediation offers a cheaper alternative, a time-effective alternative, faster alternative. Likewise, another reason for promotion of mediation is the scarcity, the lack of judges in India. The number of judges per million population in India is about 21, whereas if we observe the standards in the West, for example the US, the standards are around 50 judges per million. Likewise, there are complexities which are involved in the litigation mechanism. For example, there are frequent adjournments which are sought by the parties just to delay the litigation, and there are injunctions which are sought. Pending the enforcement of the award or the decree provided by the lower courts, there are temporary and permanent injunctions which are sought. They again lead to the increase in cost regarding the settlements. Plus, there are certain litigations which can be avoided. There can be cases which can be compounded, which can be settled outside the court. Even the criminal offenses, certain criminal offenses which are non-serious in nature, they can be settled outside the court. And therefore, in civil matters, for example, the property disputes, the breach of contract disputes, they can be settled through mediation easily, saving both time and money. And there are commercial issues, for example, business transactions, which can be settled outside. There are family conflicts, for example, divorce, inheritance disputes, they can be settled outside the courts, and therefore the courts which are clogged right now with so many cases will be easier to function. Then the government is itself one of the largest litigants in India. For example, the disputes related to land acquisition, the tax related disputes, there the courts will find that their burden will be lesser if the mediation is arrived upon. Now, why do we need a statute also? There is a Mediation Act 2023 which was enacted. And why we did that? Because there are international examples like Australia, Singapore and Italy. They have dedicated laws to promote mediation. Earlier we had the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, but a statute, a law providing for mediation and the mechanism and the regulation of mediation was missing. Now it is there in the form of Mediation Act 2023. This was recommended by the Mediation and Conciliation Project Committee of the Supreme Court also, the enactment of this statute. Even prior to this statute, there were several statutes which indirectly provided for the mediation, where the courts could also refer the disputes for mediation, for example, under the Civil Procedure Code 1908 as amended in 2002. Under this specifically, if you see section 89, it provides that the courts, they can refer to the mediation various kinds of disputes. There was the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, the Companies Act, the Commercial Courts Act, the Consumer Protection Act, etc., which also provide for the mediation. Also, India is a signatory to the Singapore Convention on Mediation. It is formally also known as the United Nations Convention on the Internationally Agreed Settlements as a result of mediation. And because India is a signatory, therefore India also needed to put in place a statute. Now, what does the Mediation Act 2023 say? What are the key provisions of this act? It provides for the pre-litigation mediation. It provides that before going for the litigation for certain kinds of disputes, it is mandatory to go for mediation. In the civil or commercial disputes, it is mandatory for both the parties to submit themselves to mediation. Even if they fail to arrive upon an agreement in the mediation proceedings, the courts may refer the parties again to mediation if at any stage both the parties agree for going to mediation. Plus, the statute provides that there are certain kinds of disputes which are not fit for mediation, which should not be submitted for mediation. For example, if it involves the claims against a party which is a minor, the claims against a party which is of unsound mind, the criminal disputes, the rights of third parties if they are affected, apart from the rights of the two parties which are quarreling, which are having the dispute, if the rights of any third party is also affected as a result of a probable settlement of the dispute between the two parties, then that dispute cannot be referred to mediation. And the central government may further amend this list also. Now, where is the Mediation Act 2023 applicable? This will be applicable for the mediation proceedings which are conducted in India. Now, these mediation proceedings may involve both domestic parties. It may involve one foreign party also, provided that the mediation proceedings are conducted in India. And it may involve the commercial disputes also if the government is a party to the dispute. Now, what does the Mediation Act say regarding the process of mediation? It says that the mediation proceedings, they shall remain confidential, they shall remain private, and the mediation proceedings shall be completed within 180 days. These proceedings can be extended by a further period of 180 days as per the consent of the parties, and a party may withdraw from the mediation proceedings after attending minimum 2 sessions also. The court annexed mediation, if it is done, if the court is referring the two parties for mediation, then the mediation will be done as per the rules which are framed by the courts. If it is referred to by the Supreme Court, then the rules framed by the Supreme Court for mediation shall apply. If it is referred to by the High Court of a state, then the rules framed by the High Court of that state shall apply. Regarding the mediators, the statute provides that the mediators shall be appointed either by the parties or they can be provided for by the mediation service providers. The mediation service providers can be the institutions which can be framed as per the conditions of the Mediation Act 2023. Likewise, the mediators are bound to disclose in case there is a conflict of interest. In case the mediator is also a party to the dispute or he himself stands to gain or lose from the mediation settlement, then he should disclose the conflict of interest, and once he discloses the conflict of interest, the parties may choose to replace the concerned mediator also. The statute also provides for the establishment of a Mediation Council of India. The Mediation Council of India shall be established by the central government. It shall comprise of one chairperson, 2 full-time members who shall have experience in mediation, and there shall be 3 ex officio members of the Mediation Council of India. The 3 ex officio members shall include the law secretary, the expenditure secretary, and 1 person from the industry body. What are the functions of the Mediation Council? It shall provide for the registration of the mediators who are providing the services of mediation in India, and they shall also recognize the mediation service providers or the institutions. The mediation service providers, their function is to train, to educate the mediators, and to certify the mediators. Regarding the mediated settlement agreement, the statute provides that the agreement, if arrived upon between the two parties, although it is arrived upon voluntarily, it shall be final, binding, and enforceable. This shall be enforceable as if this is a decree of the court. But this mediation settlement agreement can also be challenged in a court of law in case it has been arrived upon through fraud, through corruption, through impersonation, or if the dispute is found to be not fit for mediation. That is, the dispute can be included in the category of the disputes which have been exempted by the government, that these cannot be referred to for mediation. Additionally, the Act also provides that there can be community mediation also, where the mediators can be the persons of standing in that community. But there are certain concerns with the Mediation Act. For example, the Act provides that before going for litigation, mediation is mandatory, that both parties who are involved in a dispute have to submit themselves to mediation before they can initiate the litigation mechanism. Otherwise, they have to provide for a reasonable reason why they are not going for mediation, else the courts may impose the costs upon the parties. But this may violate Article 21. Article 21 provides for the right to life and personal liberty. Within the right to life and personal liberty, we may say is implicitly contained the right to access justice. The right to access justice ensures that any person who is aggrieved should be allowed to approach the traditional courts in India. But the Act forbids the approaching the traditional courts before the parties submit themselves to mediation. Therefore, it may be seen to be a violation of the right to access justice. Likewise, the Act provides that regarding the cross-border mediation, this shall be treated as if it is domestic when it is conducted in India, and it shall be enforceable like a decree of a court. The mediation settlement agreement shall be enforceable as if it is the decree of a court. But the Singapore Convention on Mediation provides that the mediation settlement agreements, if they are of the nature of a decree of a court, then they shall not be enforceable under the Singapore Convention. Therefore, in case there is a mediation settlement agreement arrived upon between the parties where one party is a foreign party, then that settlement agreement shall be enforceable in India because it is as if it is a decree of a court. But its worldwide enforceability may be questionable because it is not enforceable under the Singapore Convention. Likewise, the statute provides that the courts may provide for the mediation rules. In case the dispute is referred for mediation by the courts through the court annexed mediation, the Supreme Court or the High Court may frame the rules. But the common law principles say that in case the rules are formed by the Parliament, in case a statute is enacted by the Parliament, then the rules framed by the courts, they should be overshadowed. Likewise, the statute provides that it shall not be applicable to the non-commercial disputes. In case the government is a party, then the commercial disputes, their mediation settlement can be arrived upon. What are the challenges in mediation in general for India? One, mediation is provided for only in the civil cases through the Mediation Act 2023. What we can include is, we can include the criminal offenses also if they are non-serious in nature, for example, the compoundable criminal offenses. Also, the reliance is placed upon the will of the parties in mediation. If the parties involved in the dispute do not agree for a settlement, then the mediation proceedings fail. A binding award cannot be announced, just like an award can be announced in case there is an arbitration proceeding going on. There is the arbitral award. Likewise, sometimes the parties withdraw themselves from mediation because they bet on their likelihood of winning the litigation. And in case they are supposing that they can win the litigation, then the rewards which may be given by the courts may be higher than what they can get through the mediation. Likewise, sometimes the parties misuse the mediation proceedings just to postpone the trial procedure. They agree for mediation initially, but at the later stage they withdraw from the mediation proceedings, and then there is no settlement agreement and the trial then resumes again. Likewise, the attorneys, the advocates of the parties themselves also sometimes discourage the parties from going for mediation because the mediation proceedings, they usually end up sooner, and the advocates, they are able to earn lesser from the mediation proceedings as compared to the traditional litigation proceedings. Likewise, there is no standardization regarding the certification of the professional mediators in India. Now, there is a means practice question also. The Mediation Act 2023 is a significant step towards institutionalizing alternate dispute resolution in India. Examine the need for mediation in India, the key provisions of the Act, and the challenges of mediation. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to the reservation in private sector in India. The context behind it is this is the new demand which is emerging after the demand for caste census was acceded to by the central government. So, we will discuss the arguments in favor of the reservation in private sector in India, the arguments against reservation in private sector, and the judicial observations in this regard. This is important in GS2 under the topic governance. The reservation in the private sector, especially for the reservation for the residents of a state, the reservation for the locals of a state, is based upon flimsy grounds. It can be said that it is constitutionally dubious, it is socially divisive, it is politically cynical, and it is even economically myopic. For example, it is violating certain constitutional provisions, like it may violate the Article 14. The Article 14 provides for the right to equality and the equal protection by the laws. But there can be a reasonable classification which can be done without violating the right to equality. But the classification of the residents of a particular state and only the residents of a particular state being eligible for being provided the employment in the private sector also in that state may be said to be unreasonable classification and violating Article 14. Because under Article 16 subclause 2, it is explicitly prohibited. Article 16 subclause 2 prohibits the state from discriminating on the grounds of place of birth or residence. Likewise, Article 16 subclause 3 allows only the parliament to prescribe the residence requirements. But certain states have also been doing so. For example, the state of Haryana enacted a statute, the Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Act 2020, which provided for the reservation of the residents of Haryana for the jobs in the private sector. For the jobs where the salary is less than 30,000, there was a reservation of 75% for the residents of Haryana, which was provided through the statute which was enacted by the Haryana government. But that statute was ultimately termed to be unconstitutional by the Punjab and Haryana High Court in the IMT Industrial Association versus the State of Haryana case in 2023. Likewise, Article 19 subclause 1 subclause D provides for the right to move freely throughout India. But in case economic opportunities are restricted, in case jobs are reserved for the residents of a particular state only, then it may lead to the violation of their right to freely move throughout India. How will they move and settle there in case there are no economic opportunities? Likewise, it may violate Article 19 subclause 1 subclause E also, that provides for the right to reside and settle in any part of India. Again, in the absence of the economic opportunities, in the absence of the jobs, how can they effectively exercise this right? Likewise, Article 19 subclause 1 subclause G provides that there is the right to practice any profession or trade. And if private players, the private industries, are imposed upon certain restrictions, certain conditions, for example, that they have to employ people belonging to a certain state, or they have to employ certain percentage of people belonging to a certain caste, then there are arguments that it may violate their right to practice their profession or trade, as it may hamper their economic efficiency. And under Article 19 subclause 6, there can be reasonable restrictions which can be provided upon the right to freedom of profession and trade, but this restriction can be provided in the form of technical qualifications or state monopolies, not in the form of regional reservations. Therefore, the criteria which can be imposed upon the private sector, it may be unreasonable in case it is forced upon them that they have to employ the candidates only from a particular state or only from a particular caste or a certain percentage of people from a particular caste. This may not come within the reasonable restrictions which are provided for under Article 19 subclause 6. Additionally, the interstate migration, this is a topic which is mentioned under the entry 81 of the Union List. Therefore, the states are anyway not having the legislative capacity to legislate on this issue. Additionally, there are economic arguments against the reservation which may be provided in the private sector. For example, in case there is reservation provided on the basis of residence, it may affect the interstate mobility, the mobility of the high-skilled labor. The high-skilled labor, it not only provides the skills and the workforce for the destination states, it also contributes to the economic growth of the destination state as well. Plus, it may lead to the flight of industries in case there is a residence criteria which is imposed upon by a certain state. For example, it led to the flight of a few firms from Gurugram to Noida when the Haryana state imposed the local residence criteria for the employment in the private sector also through the Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Act. Likewise, it may discourage the investments which may be attracted in the private sector because the reservations for the locals or the reservation for people belonging to a certain caste only may affect the economic efficiency, which may affect the competitiveness of the industry, bringing down the investments, and it can affect the inclusive growth in India as a whole. For example, there are certain underdeveloped states where the human development indicators are poorer as compared to certain high income states. For example, the states of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, there the human development indicators are lower than some of the other more developed states. Therefore, they need inclusive growth, and that comes through the remittances also. Plus, we need to ensure that the national unity is preserved. The feelings of regionalism may be provoked, the feelings of sons of soil may be instigated in case there is the imposition of local residence criteria for the employment in the private sector also. Plus, it may violate the 50% ceiling which is provided for regarding the reservations in the Indira Sahni judgment. The Indira Sahni judgment provided for the 50% ceiling in case there is a reservation in the government jobs. But certain states regarding the reservation in private sector are going for 75% reservation for the residents of that state. Plus, it may lead to the return of an Inspector Raj as well, because the firms, they have to submit the compliance reports. In case there are residence criterias or caste criterias imposed upon them regarding the employment that they can do, then they have to submit the compliance reports, and it may lead to the corruption from the side of the audit officers, from the side of the inspectors also. Now, what are the judicial observations the judicial takes in this regard? The judiciary observed in the Menka Gandhi versus Union of India case in 1978 itself that there is a right to travel, there is a right to settle in any part of India, and in case there is a restriction upon the creative mobility which is imposed, in case there is a totalitarian decree to restrict the creative mobility, it may lead to a situation where the people in India may become like frogs in a well. It will hamper development ultimately. Therefore, mobility must not be restricted. This right to move, travel and settle must be protected. Likewise, in Dr. Pradeep Jain versus Union of India, the court had observed that there should be one domicile for India, one India, one citizenship, one India, one domicile, and there should be no state-based discrimination regarding the providing of reservation basis upon the residence in a particular state. In the state of Tamil Nadu versus K. Shyam Sundar, the court observed that when we are testing the constitutionality, the legality of the statutes enacted, then the legislative purpose must align with the constitutional values. If the constitutional values are not upheld, the legislative intent does not uphold the constitutional values, the statement of object and purposes of the statute is not in line with the constitutional values, it may be struck down by the judiciary. In Nagpur Improvement Trust versus Vittal Rao case, the court observed that arbitrary classification, for example, classification on the ground of residence, will violate Article 14. In P.A. Inamdar versus State of Maharashtra, the court observed that private entities cannot be forced. This case was although related to admissions, not for the providing of jobs, the admissions in the private institutions, and the court there had provided that the government cannot force the private educational institutions to adhere to the caste criteria while providing for the reservation in the admissions. Likewise, in IMT Industrial Association and another versus State of Haryana case, the court observed that the Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Act 2020 is ultra vires. It is unconstitutional and therefore it was struck down, and it is anyway beyond the purview of the state to legislate on this matter. Plus, the court observed that this violates constitutional morality. How? Because the citizens residing in another state, they were accorded a secondary status. They were discriminated against. Therefore, it violates the constitutional morality. A preference which is given to the residents of one state only makes them a citizen who is accorded preference, and the citizen of another state, the resident of another state, it will violate the constitutional morality. Plus, the private industries, they can't be asked to do what the state has been forbidden for itself. If the state cannot discriminate on the grounds of residence, then how can you ask the private industries to discriminate on the grounds of residence in a particular state? Also, in the USA also, there is a similar case, Peterson versus City of Greenville, where the court observed that the state enforced racial segregation will violate the right to equality. Now, there are a few arguments in favor of the reservation in the private sector as well. For example, the right to livelihood should be protected. And in case industries are established in a particular state, then the residents of that state should also have the right to seek jobs in the private sector in that state. Likewise, it is argued that Article 16 subclause 4 provides for the state empowering the state to make provisions for the advancement of any backward classes. So the state can not only provide for the reservation for backward classes in the public employment, but by extrapolating the provisions of Article 16 subclause 4, state should be able to mandate the private sector also to provide reservation for the backward classes in the private sector. Likewise, there is an argument of rising unemployment. The unemployment, for example, in Haryana, as per the periodic labor force survey, was 9% in 2021. Therefore, to counter the unemployment, the restrictions are imposed upon the private sector to provide employment for the residents of that state. And there is a local resentment also at times. The local resentment against the migrants, the residents of another state who are coming into the destination state and taking the jobs there. Plus, there is the argument of Article 38 as well. It is the duty of the state to minimize inequality and maximize welfare. In line with ensuring the duty of the state to ensure welfare, it may be said that the reservations may be provided to ensure social equity in the private sector also. Plus, it is argued that it is a legitimate imposition on the private sector, because the private sector also utilizes the public infrastructure which is funded by the government. Plus, at times they exploit the migrant workers also. And there are global examples also regarding the reservations in the private sector. For example, the US Civil Rights Act 1964, the Canada Employment Equity Act, both of them promoted to ensure social equity. So what can be the way forward in this regard? One, we need to shift our focus from reservation to development. The development and the employment generation, addressing the issue of unemployment rather. And we can ensure that there are uniform labor rights. The labor rights must be protected, adhering to the uniform standards throughout India in every state. And we can go for cultural integration for initiatives like Ek Bharat Shresht Bharat. And regarding further suggestions in this regard, the government can set up an expert panel which can give its recommendations after consulting with all the stakeholders. There is a means practice question as well. The demand for reservation in private sector has sparked a debate on social justice versus economic efficiency. Examine the arguments for and against introducing caste-based reservation in private sector, citing relevant judicial opinions. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to cryptocurrency. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few basics regarding the benefits of using cryptocurrency, the concerns associated with the cryptocurrencies. It is beneficial because the cryptocurrency transactions, they are faster. The transaction costs which are involved are lesser. They are treated almost as if they are digital gold. They are treated like a hedge against inflation, because even the sovereign currencies, they are also vulnerable to inflation. Plus, there are no middlemen which are involved in the crypto transactions, unlike the traditional fiat currencies. Plus, they remain private. There is privacy. The crypto transactions, they are anonymous. If you need to send bitcoins to someone, you don't need to know their identity. All you need to know is their Bitcoin wallet address. That's it. And it may promote financial inclusion also. the usage of cryptocurrencies can reach the people who don't have the bank accounts, who are unbanked. All they need is an internet connection. Likewise, the freelancers also seek to benefit from the usage of cryptocurrencies because they are often employed by the entities involved in the crypto transactions, in the blockchain transactions, etc. And there are business opportunities which are created. For example, the establishment of crypto exchanges, and the international transactions can be done easily. There is no need for pledging of gold or a third party regulator, etc. But there are certain concerns in the adoption of the cryptocurrencies. As per the SC Garg Subhash Chandra Garg committee, the cryptocurrencies pose risk to the users because the cryptos, they are having a speculative nature. The crypto is not backed by any sovereign guarantees. For example, rupee, dollar, etc. They are backed by sovereign guarantees, but the cryptocurrencies are not backed by any sovereign guarantee, and a person may lose access to their own cryptocurrency if they lose the private key, if they forget the private key. And there is the risk of the swindling by the frauds also online. Plus, it may be used for crimes because the transactions remain anonymous. There is no money trail. Therefore, the proceeds of crime, they can be hidden in the form of cryptocurrencies, and it may be used for the hawala transactions, money laundering, etc. also. And the anonymity which the crypto transactions provide, again, it may be used in terrorist funding as well. The supply of the cryptocurrencies again remains outside the purview of the RBI. The RBI may control the supply of rupee in the market, but it cannot control the supply of the bitcoins. And the usage of energy that is required for the mining of the cryptocurrencies is huge. Likewise, it may reduce the effectiveness of the monetary policy of the government. The monetary policy seeks to control the inflation, and if the cryptocurrencies usage increases, then the effectiveness of the monetary policy decreases, and the cryptocurrencies on top of it do not have any underlying value. They are just digital tokens. Now, what is the global outlook regarding the adoption of the cryptocurrencies? El Salvador even launched the Bitcoin Volcano Bond. Likewise, Bitcoin Exchange Traded Fund is also there, launched by BlackRock in USA. There are companies which are involved whose primary function is crypto mining itself, and they are listed on the Nasdaq. In Israel and Germany also, the definition has been given for the companies involved in the crypto transactions, and the OECD has come up with the crypto asset reporting framework, that is to improve transactions transparency to ensure that the crypto regulation can be put in place. Now, coming to the article, Bitcoin mining is the process in which a specialized computer is used to solve complex mathematical problems and to launch new coins into circulation. But there were some frauds which were highlighted. There are Ponzi schemes which are operated by creating fake exchange platforms, the Bitcoin exchange platforms using falsified data. They lure the investors by promising them high returns, and then they disappear after collecting investments in the form of bitcoins or even bank transfers also. The Enforcement Directorate found that they use a complex web of transactions. They use transactions through the dark web, transactions through the cryptocurrency wallets to hide the money trail. As per a report of the US FBI, India ranks 5th globally in terms of the number of cryptocurrency related complaints and 6th in terms of the overall estimated losses that India suffered due to cryptocurrency related frauds. Now, the next article is related to Niger. 5 Indians were abducted there. There was a coup also in Niger last year. So this topic is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. Before coming to Niger, let's have a look at the Sahel region. Sahel region is part of the North Africa. It extends from Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea. We can observe that the countries Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia and Eritrea are part of the Sahel region. This Sahel region is the semi-arid region in the northern Africa, and the countries which are part of the Sahel region, they have been victims of the extremism and military coups, etc. For example, in Mali, there is Islamist extremism. There is Al-Qaeda affiliated Al-Morbitan group which is operational. If you look at Mauritania, it has served as a part of the traditional drug route. The drug trafficking and human trafficking used to happen between South America and Europe, and it was a stopping point. And there are sub-state militant activities also in the country. In Nigeria, the Boko Haram is particularly operational, and Niger went through a coup only last year. Now coming to Niger specifically, Niger is a landlocked country. It is sharing its border with Algeria, Libya, Chad, Nigeria, Benin, Burkina Faso, and Mali. It was historically a French colony, but it got independence in 1960. 80% of the land area of Niger is part of the Sahara Desert itself. It has certain resources, for example, it has gold reserves and it has uranium reserves. 7% of the global supply of uranium comes from Niger itself, but it is an impoverished country, a very poor country, and therefore it has experienced political instability also. There have been a series of military coups there, and there are certain terrorist and extremist groups which are operating from there. For example, the IS Sahel militancy and banditry is there in the central Tawa region. The Al-Qaeda affiliated JNIM operates in the western part of Niger. The Boko Haram insurgency is there in the southeastern Diffa region. And the Chadian and Sudanese rebels and the drug traffickers operate in the Agadez region, which is there on the border of Libya, Algeria and Chad. And this functions as a smuggling route for the armed groups. Also, the Niger River flows through the country Niger. It even forms its boundary with the country Benin as well. It is 4,200 kilometers long. It is the third longest river in Africa after Nile and Congo. It is also known as the Boomerang River because it has a serpentine shape. It flows through the Sahara Desert, Mali's Timbuktu city, and drains into the Gulf of Guinea. The countries through which the Niger River flows include Niger, Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Benin, Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria. The river basin accounts for 7.5% of African continent. The major tributary of this river is Benue River. There is a previous year question also regarding this region in 2023 that the countries Chad, Guinea, Mali and Sudan, they caught the international attention because of which of the following reasons? Please try to answer this. Now the next article is related to the rising vaccine preventable diseases. This is important in GS2 under the topic health. There has been a rise in the vaccine preventable diseases. For example, measles, meningitis, yellow fever, they have been resurging. Why? Because the vaccinations have not been done. There are gaps in the vaccination. Children are missing vaccinations as there have been cuts in the funding which are usually provided to the low-income countries by various organizations and the developed countries. The World Health Organization, UNICEF and Gavi, they have warned that there are threats related to misinformation and propaganda regarding the harms of the vaccines. There is a population growth also in the low-income countries and the resulting humanitarian crisis because of the rise in the vaccine preventable diseases. Now, what are the current challenges in vaccination? Half of the 108 odd surveyed countries face immunization disruptions as per the World Health Organization. Disease surveillance has weakened in over 50% of the countries. Close to 15 million children have missed all the vaccines in 2023. This number was lower at less than 13 million in 2019. More than 50% of the unvaccinated children are there in the conflict-ridden regions. And measles outbreak has been rising. For example, in USA itself, the cases have tripled in 2024. There has been an impact of the funding cuts also, because due to the cuts in funding, the vaccinations are not being done, which leads to the risk of losing the global health gains, which have come at a lot of cost already. And the big catch-up initiative, which was started to recover from the COVID era losses, that will be at risk in case there are not enough funds which are provided to the low-income countries. Now, why does vaccination matter? Because it saves lives. As per the data, about 154 million were saved in the last 50 years due to vaccinations. And 40% of infant survival is linked to the vaccines itself.
The measles vaccine alone accounts for 60% of the lives saved. So it is extremely important. And the vaccines have eradicated the smallpox, and they have even nearly eliminated polio. And the rate of return on the investments through the vaccines is very high. 54% of the amount invested in immunization is returned due to the health gains. What is the progress of India in terms of immunization? The Universal Immunization Program covers 26 million newborns and 34 million pregnant ladies yearly. And we have ensured that India became polio free in 2014, and we eliminated the maternal and neonatal tetanus in 2015. We introduced the new vaccines also, including for PCC and RVV, and full immunization coverage is at 76% as per the National Family Health Survey 5. 1 in 4 children in India but still misses essential vaccines. We need to improve the coverage that way. What can be the way forward in this regard? We need to ensure that there is global support for immunization, the contribution from the developed countries, and the access to the patented medicines also. And we need to ensure that there is sustained funding and commitment to the Immunization Agenda 2030. The Gavi's 2025 summit aims to raise $9 billion to protect 500 million children from 2026 to 2030. The goal is to save 8 million plus lives through expanded vaccination programs. Now, the next article is related to public funded research and development. This is important in GS3 under the topic Achievement of Indians in Science and Technology, Indigenization of Technology, and Developing New Technology. Now, a report was published by the Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, the Confederation of Indian Industries, and the Center for Technology, Innovation and Economic Research. It was a result of the survey of 244 public-funded R&D organizations. It excluded the organizations involved in defense research, space research, atomic research, and the universities and academic institutions, specifically focusing upon the publicly funded R&D labs and organizations. Why? The purpose is to evaluate whether the R&D labs are focusing only upon the academic research, or they are focusing upon the industry-aligned innovations which can be practically used to improve upon the status quo in India, to improve the human development indicators in India, to guide the R&D organizations to contribute to the sustainable development goals and the national priorities, to enhance their socio-economic impact. For example, particular research in health, women in science, employment, skilling, etc. Now, what did the study find? It said that the startup support in India is less, which is provided for by the R&D organizations. For example, only 25% are providing incubation, and the support for the deep tech startups is even lower, as only 16% of the organizations provided support for the deep tech startups, which is the need of the hour. And the industry collaboration is also poorer. For example, only 15% collaborated with the overseas industries. The access should be open. The facility should provide access to their data so that it can be used, but only half of them have opened the facilities to external researchers and students. When we look at the national missions, their contribution to national missions, 50% have contributed to Make in India, 35% have aligned their goals with Skill India, and 30% targeted the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. When we look at the workforce trends, then there has been a decline in the permanent staff, rather a rise has been there in the contractual staff. The young researchers, although, have increased marginally only to 58%, earlier it was about 55%. The budget that is allocated to them has grown. The combined budget of 155 labs rose from less than 10,000 crores to more than 13,000 crores in 2022-2023. The gender parity has remained stagnant, as the women scientists representation has been stagnant during the period 2021 to 2023. So what are the recommendations of this report? One, we need to ensure that their mandates are reviewed. They need to align their goals again with the national priorities, for example, Viksit Bharat and the critical technology priorities. They need to collaborate more with the industry so that their research is not only academic in nature but also practically applicable. They need to give more support to the startups. For example, the Section 8 companies may be established to aid startups. They need to improve the access, open their access, improve the facility sharing with the academia and the researchers, and this all has to be done urgently on a war footing as per the recommendation of the report. Now, the next article is related to the data on judicial vacancies and backlogs. This is important in GS2 under the topic Structure, Organization and Functioning of the Judiciary. The Delhi High Court recently observed that there is an acute shortage of the judges, and this is the prime reason behind the backlog of cases in the Delhi High Court. As per its observation, there are 36 judges currently in Delhi High Court, whereas the sanctioned strength is 60. So it accounts for 40% of the vacancies, and when we see the pending cases in Delhi High Court, it is more than 1.34 lakh. When we look at the case pendency overall in India, in the Supreme Court, it has been more than 81,000 as of 2025. In the High Courts combined, it is more than 62 lakhs. And when we look at the district and subordinate courts, it is more than 4.5 crore. When we look at the High Court situation especially, the sanctioned strength for all the High Courts combined together in India is 1114 judges, but the current strength is only 769. So there are 31% vacancies in the High Courts across India. The worst hit High Courts are the Allahabad High Court, where there is close to 50% vacancy, and there are the pendency of close to 12 lakh cases. When we look at Punjab and Haryana High Court, there also 32 seats of the High Court judges are vacant out of the 85 sanctioned. Only Sikkim and Meghalaya High Courts are there where there are 0 vacancies. When we look at the case disposal versus the case filing trends, 2019 was a year of exception, where the number of cases disposed was more than the number of new cases filed. When we look at 2024, again the gap has been widening as the number of cases filed are more than the number of cases disposed of by the High Courts. Now, there have been appointment delays also. For example, there are pending proposals to the tune of 150 with the Government of India and with the Supreme Court Collegium. And there are the pendencies from the High Court Collegium also, where 205 candidates are awaiting recommendation. And there is a non-compliance with the Memorandum of Procedure also, whereby the mandate is to ensure that it should be initiated 6 months before the vacancy, but it is not done, the recommendation procedure. When we look at the solution, one partial solution which was suggested is the appointment of ad hoc judges. In 2021, the Supreme Court gave the order whereby it allowed the retired judges for the clearance of the backlog of criminal cases. In 2025, there was a relaxation where the High Courts could appoint 2 to 5 ad hoc judges, that is less than 10% of their sanctioned strength. And the current status, if we see, there have been no proposals received from the High Courts for the appointment of ad hoc judges. When we look at the India Justice Report 2025, it says that there is a surge of 20% in the pendency of the cases from 2020 to 2024. The judge to population ratio, it is only 1 judge per 18 lakh people in India for the High Courts. When we look at the workloads, there are certain extremes. For example, the Allahabad and the Madhya Pradesh High Courts, there are more than 15,000 cases pending per judge in the respective High Courts, whereas in Sikkim, Tripura and Meghalaya, there are less than 1,000 cases which are pending per judge in the High Courts. Thank you.